So hello everybody and welcome. I'm Yasmin. I work at Aston University as an MBA careers consultant, and Aimee.
Hiya, I am also an MBA careers consultant and team entrepreneurship coach at Aston. So it's a pleasure to have you with us today. Fantastic to see so many of you, and always good to have faces that we can see occasionally. I know the recording's on, and I know you're eating your lunch, so not everybody's going to want to show camera, but it's always nice to see a few people when we can do. Okay, so we've got Gymshark as well, learning designer at Gymshark. Fantastic, lovely to meet you, Gemma. And Sean from Select Car Leasing. So we're all looking for inspiration, new ideas and creativity. So hopefully we can help with a little bit of that today. So I'm going to start us off by saying, I'm not creative. Do you know what? A lot of us say that, don't we? We say that we're not creative. That is the biggest excuse in the book. I'm going to let the designer work on that. I'm going to let the creative work on that. I'm going to let another team do the innovation because I'm not creative. I can't come up with creative ideas. Well, that's a lie, because we're all creative, but we're creative in different ways. And some of what we're going to talk about today is around this idea of process that supports creativity. So quite often people are not just spontaneously creative. If you stick us all in a room like we have done today and say, okay, you now need to solve world hunger, we'd probably come up with an answer involving samosas, because we've just heard all about them. But the reality is that we're under pressure then. We haven't had time to prepare. We can't just flick on the creativity switch. That's not how it works. We need to do things that get us into that mindset, that creates structure and process around that. So we might sit there and say, sorry, I'm not creative, but that's the wrong excuse. We're not in a creative environment. The conditions aren't right for us to be creative. But you in and of yourself, you are creative. You just need to be in that right space. So I've got a challenge for you, and I don't know how this is going to work. It needs some of you to be on camera and all of you to be on mics if you can be. But I would like you to count to 10. So the rules of the game, you have to leave a second in between each number. So you can't talk over each other, otherwise we have to go back to 0. Different people have to speak, so you can't say 1 and then 2. It has to pass to somebody else, and you've got to work together to get up to 10. So somebody starts with 1 and somebody else jumps in with 2, and then you carry on and you have to get to 10. So are we ready to play the game?
Yeah.
Michelle, you've got your hand in the air.
I'm going to give the first number, and I'm indicating that by putting my hand in the air. And if you're going to give number 2, put your hand in the air. 1.
Oh, already.
3.
Oh.
Ooh, there was a duplication back to 0. So start again.
1.
2.
3.
4.
Too long, back to 0.
1.
2.
3.
4.
5.
Oh,
sorry.
duplication. We're back to 0 again. Okay, who's going to start this time? You've got to start with a different person on 1.
1.
2.
3.
4.
Oh, we'll do one more go. Try and get to 10. At the moment, we've hit 5 is our limit. So go for it.
1.
2. 3. Oh.
Well done for trying. So counting to 10 is quite hard, really. And who'd have thought that you'd come on a webinar this lunchtime, all very, very highly intelligent people, and you wouldn't be able to count to 10. But what is it that we're trying to accomplish there? We're trying to get that sense of group, that we are working together, that we're a collective. And it helps to have the cameras on, because that body language, you can see when somebody's about to speak. It's a game that you can play when you're face to face as well. And actually you can have it that somebody has to stand up and say the number. and then sit down again, and the next person can't stand up until the first person sat down. And we had a group of students actually who joined us in September last year, and they managed to get up to 30 on their second attempt. And then we realized that they were signaling to each other. So they were cheating, as it were. They were signaling who was going to go, and they followed the same pattern every time. So we made them stand. It was when we were allowed to be in the classroom. We made them stand with their backs to each other so they couldn't see anything. And they actually, all credit to them, did manage to get to 10 on the second attempt with their backs to each other. So that was quite interesting. But it's a game that we play, and we play games like this sometimes because we're trying to set the tone for a session, sometimes because we've got really, really serious in a session and we need to bring it back, we need to dial it back, sometimes because, quite frankly, we're all zoomed out, we've had enough, and we need to get everybody back in the virtual room with us. So it's a way of getting that engagement together. So what is a game? Any ideas? Anybody want to come on the microphone and define a game, or pop something in the chat box? And hi, Greta, great to see you from Digital Glue as well. Any definitions of games? Anyone want to jump in and share? What is a game?
Place where people have fun.
Yeah, so a place where people have fun. Michael, any activity leading to a prize or a lose, win or lose? Okay. What else? Fun, playing, competitive, definitely. What else makes a game?
Could it be the sense of escapism from what you're doing?
Yeah, so we often have that sense of escapism. We head into that game world. It is also a store in the UK. Yep, we do have a brand in the UK called Game.
I think sometimes when playing a game, brain's working differently, so it's both a challenge and also a bit of, you know, change is as good as a rest sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely. So it shifts us into that different mind space. So when we talk about games, games tend to have their own space, their own environment. We operate outside of the norm. When we go into game world, and that could be playing poker, that could be playing Monopoly, that could be Ludo, it could be 21, it could be counting to 10 as we've just done then. When we go into that game space, we expect something a little bit different. The normal rules of behavior don't apply, but we do have rules. So games tend to have rules. There are ways in which we're expected to behave. There are things that we need to abide by. If any of you or your partners do anything with tabletop modeling, then you will know that the rule books are massive. So there are whole infrastructures set up around the game world, around this different space that we inhabit. They tend to have boundaries. So there is a beginning and an end to a game. There is a space in which that game takes place, and you're either in the game or out of the game. And there are often artifacts. So what do we mean by artifacts? We're talking about the fact that there might be dice or counters or characters or cards. There are things that signal that you are in that game space, things that you use to play those games. And there are goals. So this idea of competition, win or lose, there is something you're trying to achieve in the game. And that could be collaborative or it could be competitive. But that game space offers us somewhere different to be and a way in which we can think differently. So having said that, why do we play games in business? Games are things we do when we're children. They're things that we do away from the professional life. Why do we play games in business? Any ideas? Anyone want to jump in?
I guess it depends what you mean by play games, because if you mean political games, that's possibly not what you mean. If you mean why do we use games in business, to stimulate thought, to learn?
Yeah, so definitely stimulating thinking, learning. We've got scenario modeling, creating a safe space and challenges in the chat to change the dynamic as well. Yeah, so we play games in business for the same reasons that we do when we're a child. because we want to have fun, but also because the science says that when we are playful, we are more likely to be creative. We're less likely to be constrained by day-to-day life. Game playing, yeah, Becky, that's brilliant as well. It's that inclusivity. Quite often there are dominant people within any meeting space. And those dominant people, particularly in a virtual space, it has to be said, they can take over. They do all of the talking. You don't really come off mic and have your voice heard. But in game playing, where there are rules, where everybody contributes, everybody participates, everybody has their turn, it can be a much more inclusive environment where we can get all of the different perspectives involved. So we play games in business to connect and to communicate, to establish those ideas, find opportunities to innovate. You may have come across the phrase gamification as well. So when we're gamifying something, we're putting those rules in place, and that end position, that end goal, that winning point, that prize, because we want to compete for it. So we can gamify the learning experience by having little badges every time we complete the training course. And then at the end, you collect all those badges together and you get your certificate. That's an element of gamification. But also, as you've mentioned, Michelle, there is a darker side in terms of game playing. It can be quite Machiavellian. We do play games politically within organizations. So when we're talking about game playing in this context, we're not talking about the games we play politically, because that's not something that we see as necessarily a positive. We're talking about the games that we play in order to create a space for creativity and innovation, to create an opportunity for discussion. There are challenges, though. If we do gamify a process, then people can get lost in the game itself. So you forget the whole point of being there in the first place. So if you're trying to solve a customer service issue, so your organization has identified that there is a gap, there's a point in the sales funnel where customers fall out, and there's a point where they're not happy with your service. You've seen that you need to improve customer satisfaction. You've got lots and lots of data. You've gone out and you've spoken to customers. You've got their anecdotal feedback. But then you start getting lost in the game because somebody's made it competitive. There are 3 groups working on coming up with this solution, and you get focused on beating the other groups, and you forget that actually the whole purpose of that conversation is the customer. It's not about you and your colleagues in the competition, but the customer getting the satisfaction at the end of it. So sometimes gamification can lead us down rabbit holes. We might get a bit stuck. It might be that we set up this gamified approach, but we don't put enough support or buy-in behind it from senior leadership. We don't have significant rewards or incentives for people to engage. So if we don't feel that the stakes are high enough, then why are we going to put ourselves forward to play a game, to get involved, when we could just heads down, get on with the day job and not worry about it? So there needs to be a reason. People need to want to play the games. They want to be involved because they can see the output. Gamification can focus. When we talk about motivation, we talk about extrinsic and intrinsic. So the intrinsic motivation is when you do something for the self-satisfaction, the gratification. So you learn for the sake of learning, you enjoy the learning experience, you love knowing new things. Whereas the extrinsic motivator is the certificate you get at the end, or the pat on the back that you get from your boss. Gamification focuses on those extrinsic motivators rather than the intrinsic. And the problem, if you're purely focused on that extrinsic reward, is that people tend to lose sight of the end goal, but they also lose interest in the process. Because ultimately, much as we want to be extrinsically rewarded, so we want the pat on the back, we want the promotion, the pay rise, the certificate, whatever it might be, we're only going to keep going if we feel inside us that we've been motivated, that we are getting that sense of self-satisfaction and gratification. So there are downsides to game playing and gamification, but if we're aware of them, then when we're constructing that game space, we can make sure that we aren't falling into those traps. So there's lots of terminology around all of this, lots of terminology around game playing, game storming, collaboration, innovation, invention, and so on. When we're talking about game playing within that business space, what we're often trying to do is get co-creation happening. So we want different individuals or different groups of people to come together to create something, to collaborate, to come up with ideas or to ideate. And we've all sat in those sessions where it's painful, isn't it? Somebody hands out the post-it notes and tells you that you are going to be creative today and you're not leaving the room until you've come up with 5 good ideas. And they've bought some donuts because donuts clearly make everybody more creative. So you have to eat the donuts and then the Haribo, and there's probably a whole vat of coffee in there as well. And suddenly you are going to be creative, because if you're not creative, you're not going home today. It doesn't work, does it? We can create that space to be more creative, but we have to want to be there. We have to want to collaborate. And that means breaking the ice a bit as well. So today we've broken the ice a bit because we've played the 1 to 10 game, and more of you are now on camera than were before. Some of you have come on the microphone, and I bet you if we hadn't done that at the start, you wouldn't have been willing to come off mute, would you? You wouldn't have been willing to show your faces. So we've got to create that trust and that bond before we can jump into co-creation.
Sorry,
go for it, Yasmin.
Before you move on to your next bit, I was just going to add to that a question for everyone in relation to what Aimee said about sometimes creating the environment for creativity. It isn't always effective because you're forced into an artificial space to be creative. So I wondered whether people might be willing to share when they are most creative. So I know for me, if I go on a walk and my brain is relaxed, sometimes that's where I randomly get ideas or I start thinking about things, even though I'm trying to switch off from work maybe, but occasionally that's when things pop into my head and I think, oh, that might be a good idea, or maybe I should try this. So I wondered whether other people could relate to that, or had times, maybe, I don't know, in the shower or wherever, where some of those creative ideas start to appear.
I think for me, the kind of creative side of what we do in the business is all about like brainstorming. So bringing kind of like not too many, maybe like 2 or 3 people, and just if you'll just bring an idea individually, and it kind of grows organically, to be honest, and everyone's kind of on the same page.
That's great, yeah. So
Doesn't-
that kind
yeah.
of bouncing it around a bit.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter like environment wise, I don't think, for us. I think it's, you know, it's just talking and communication.
Sean says, I feel most creative walking my dog. Yeah, she brings out the best of me. Happiness is creativity for me. Yeah, definitely. I think Aimee, you might be able to relate to that as well with the dog walks.
Definitely. I think that has been the best thing about the last 15 months. There's obviously been some horrendous stuff going on, but the ability to be able to take a step back, to walk the dogs, to think, okay, what matters? What are the things that we've got to achieve today? And how can we go about achieving them differently? I think that's been quite powerful. So thank you for sharing that. So this phrase, game storming came about kind of 10, 15 years ago. It comes from analysis of Silicon Valley. So at that time, there was a lot of success happening in the Silicon Valley space. There was a lot going on that was positive. We were hearing news every day, and clearly those people, they must be made of something different because they're creative, they're innovative, they're making loads of money, coming up with all these exciting ideas. What are they doing that we're not? And obviously the default answer to that is, oh, there mustn't be anything different, it's just luck, they're just working hard. Well, no, the reality is there was something that was different within those organizations. And that was that they were putting process and investment around creativity and innovation. So they were focusing time to be creative. And now 15 years on, that doesn't sound that weird anymore. But back then that seemed a bit strange to quite a lot of corporate organizations. So there was a book that was written, and you can see the website as well, but the book is Game Storming, and it's by a team of people who went round Silicon Valley and they interviewed different creative teams, innovation teams, and said, what do you do? And they collected together various games that were played in order to try and inspire creativity. And a lot of it you'll be quite familiar with. It's using post-it notes, it's sticking lots of ideas up on the board and then putting sticky notes so everybody goes around and votes for the one that they think's the best, and then you progress that to the next round. It's using whiteboards and markers, it's structuring conversations so that you go through an opening big question through a process and then you close it down to come up with an answer. So none of this is rocket science, although it is used in rocket scientists. NASA use game storming, but none of this is rocket science. A lot of it is things that you will be very familiar with, but it just had a name put onto it. So game storming is the name for a process by which you can ideate, be creative, be innovative within an organization. And as I say, most of the games that are in that book, you don't have to buy the book. Most of them are on the website and you can have a go and you can have a play with them. Over to you, Yasmin.
Yeah. So can we still play games in the virtual world? I think we've probably demonstrated this earlier with the counting to 10, although a very simple game. There are lots of different ways that gameplay can be brought into the virtual space. So even things like the game storming Aimee just talked about in a collaborative environment where you've got virtual whiteboards and things where you can collaborate as a team and input ideas and arrange things in a way that can then be presented or collated. And I think probably in the last year or so, since we've been in various lockdowns, technology companies have been putting out even more apps and things that enable us to do some of these things, to be able to work with each other and use some of these tools. But I'll give you an example of gameplay I've used with students at Aston. Is we do all these coaching sessions with our teams, and sometimes it's quite difficult trying to encourage a group of students to actually talk to each other, to share things, or conversations dried up, or the meeting suddenly just goes downhill from whatever the intended purpose of that meeting was. So including things like gameplay to just kind of stop and take a step back and try to reignite that team spirit and getting them to work together and understand they're in it together. So things like a mini taskmaster game. So I'll get them to do things like what is your best noise, and they go around and each have to make a noise that they think is their best noise, or write a 10-word story, which then actually involves a bit of creativity and juices going, thinking I've got 10 words, I can have as many sentences as I want, but they can only be 10 words. Or run around the house and collect as many blue items and bring them back to the screen, and then really thinking outside the box as well, what is blue? What constitutes something that is blue? And you know, even some of them have gone in with water and water bottles, and this is kind of blue, maybe it looks blue to me. So getting them to kind of come out of that workspace for a few minutes and then back into that workspace, it can be really, really effective. So I'd be curious to hear your definitions for creativity, innovation, and invention. So we're going to give this a go. You can either use the link that's at the bottom of the screen there. Aimee, I don't know if you want to perhaps paste it into the chat as well so people can click on it, or use the QR code. It will take you to a Padlet, and you should be able to click on the little plus symbols to add to it. And you can put words in. I believe you can draw on it as well. But if you want to put in your own definitions of what you think is creativity, innovation, and invention. If you don't want to use the Padlet, we're also happy for you to just speak or use the chat. But I'm just going to give you a couple minutes to do that.
And I can see things are being added, so that's a good start.
Yeah, I'm sure we can, obviously we can all see it by clicking on the link, but
was going to say, I'll share it in a second. Does anybody else need the QR code, or shall I share? Let me share the Padlet.
Got some good stuff there on creativity, communication, for example, using imagination, freedom to explore ideas, exploring ideas, innovation, something that adapts. Yeah, definitely a vision. And then for invention, we've got something new and different, problem solving, creating easier solutions, new solutions, coming up with a brand new solution to a problem. We've got quite a lot in creativity there. Building on team words, ideas, yeah, individuality. Innovation can be ideas into something tangible, so actually doing something with that creativity. Yeah, that's a really good point. Outside the box, yeah. Invention can involve collaboration for sure. In fact, collaboration and teams seems to come across in all these areas, it seems. We've got transformation as well, lateral thinking. Good stuff. Yeah, so lots of good ideas there. Thinking about the future, problem solving. Problem solving, I think, has come up a couple of times as well. So I think in summary, we're thinking of creativity, innovation, invention as having some differentiating factors. So from creativity not necessarily being tangible, down to invention and innovation potentially being more tangible, but there's a lot of crossover between the different areas as well. And they are, of course, all interlinked, as I think you've all identified.
So when we talk about creativity, we're talking about adding value by combining things, combining different ideas, combining different experiences to add value. And that's one of the things that doesn't often come across when we talk about being creative, but creativity is about value. So adding that value to what came before. If you've got pens and a piece of paper, you're adding value when you turn that into artwork, because you're combining the pens and the paper to add that value. When you innovate, you take that creativity and you commercialize it, or you make it tangible, you make it practical. And when you invent, it's something completely new. But innovation doesn't have to be completely new. It can be incremental. We talk about often disruptive innovation. And disruptive innovation is the stuff that does what it says on the tin. It disrupts. It shakes things up. It gets in the way. It changes the world entirely. But most innovation is sustaining innovation. It's the innovation that keeps us going, continuously developing, continuously changing, continuously innovating. But that's not the stuff that we read about. That's not the stuff that gets the highlight on the staff newsletter. But that's the stuff that keeps the business going and ensures that our customers are constantly getting the service that they need and the experience that they need from us. I'm going to swap you back now. Okay.
Fabulous. So I believe you can actually see your creative type. So there is a quiz. I haven't actually done this myself. Have you done this, Aimee?
I have, but I come out different. I've come out a few different ones, but the descriptions on this are absolutely hilarious. So this is a free test that you can do. It's done by Adobe. So Adobe make the software for Photoshop and InDesign and so on. So obviously there's a reason for them to share this quiz, because it gets their software out there. But it talks about the different ways in which you can be creative in your creative personality. So whether you're more of a thinker or a designer. But yeah, just something that we thought we'd put in there as a bit of good fun.
And I imagine if it's different every time, it maybe depends on what kind of state you're in or where you are or what mindset you're in at the time of doing. So I think like any kind of personality based questionnaire, it's not you can only be one thing, you're pigeonholed and you're stuck with that for life, but actually you adapt and you tap into some of these different ways of being creative as well, depending on the space you're in. So here's a question for you. There's two images on the screen here, two works of art. Now I want you to guess which of these pictures was drawn by an artist, a human being, and which one was drawn by a machine, by artificial intelligence. I'd like you to guess. Which is which?
This is a trick question.
So we've got right human, left machine, right artist. Anyone else? Someone says right machine, right human artist, left machine, right. Most of you are correct. So the image on the left was drawn by artificial intelligence, but it is a unique piece of art. It's not a copy of something that exists. It is a drawing, an image that the machine is programmed to make from scratch. The writers are Jackson Pollock. But what's quite interesting is I was reading in a book recently about AI and creativity, was someone tried to actually create a machine that would create art similar to Jackson Pollock, thinking, well, it's just random splashes on a canvas. How hard can it be? I can program a pendulum to just splash art, splash paint on a canvas and sell it at an auction. And he tried to actually sell it and it didn't sell. And people will try all the time to fake Jackson Pollock work and sell it. But it turns out that actually his paintings aren't that random, that there is an element of mathematics that goes into the dimensions of the splashes on the canvas. And they are so unique, it's very difficult to interpret and make a machine do that same piece of art. So always an interesting debate about, well, can AI be creative? Can AI create something new? Well, if creativity is simply the act of creating something new, then yes, it can be creative, but perhaps not in the same way that a human can use lots of different principles like mathematics and art to pull these different things together and make something so odd that we look at and say that is art. Another example that I like to talk about with artificial intelligence and autonomy and gameplay. You may know about this because there was a whole documentary about this on Netflix, and it's come up in a lot of literature as well about gameplaying and artificial intelligence. Is a small startup called DeepMind back in 2010 created artificial intelligence that could play computer games and potentially win a computer game. So they got one of their machines to learn loads of Sega and Atari games and programmed it to win these games and to learn to improve at these games. But most famously, they created AlphaGo. So if you've heard of the ancient Chinese game Go, it is far more complicated than chess. There's thousands of ways you can win Go. Very, very difficult to learn and to play successfully. You have whole championships, much like chess, of people playing Go. And in this famous example, AlphaGo played the Korean champion and won, I think, 4 out of 5 games. There was one game the machine didn't win because I forgot the chap's name, but he it's on the screen, Lee Sedol. He came up with a move that was so unconventional, so weird. The machine had completely discounted it as, oh, why would anyone even bother playing that move? I'm not even going to bother including it in my algorithm. And it completely threw the machine's way of thinking that it wasn't able to win. But on every other game it did, and it actually learned. It learned from the bizarre move. It started picking up on more slightly less common moves and incorporated them into its learning. So again, I think we're obviously looking at a slightly different way of thinking about game playing, but how we might factor things like artificial intelligence into it. And can artificial intelligence play games and be creative in the way that we can? And perhaps it's not quite as sophisticated as we are as humans, because obviously we've got a lot more things going on. So emotion, for example, is not something we can program a machine to do, but we bring emotion a lot into our creativity and our game playing. But at the time, in 2010, when they created AlphaGo, it was considered as a decade ahead of its time, as being able to in a more sophisticated way, learn and adapt and win at such a complex game.
Okay, so moving from games to innovations, where do innovations come from? Lots and lots of places. So we can innovate. Innovation comes from shocks to the system, and we've definitely seen that in the past 15 months. There's been a massive shock to the business world, to the economic system, to the way in which we're used to doing things. And from that, we've seen a phenomenal amount of innovation, businesses doing things differently that they never expected they would be able to do prior to 2020. Sometimes things are accidents. So if we think about penicillin, that's definitely unexpected and surprising, but gave us a new way of innovating within the healthcare sector. We might watch others, we might benchmark, we might imitate. So Formula One is a really good example of this. There is a huge amount of time invested in engineers sneaking around the pits, trying to see under the covers what have their competitors been up to, and then reverse engineering that technology to apply to their own Formula One car. But it also comes out into the mainstream automotive sector. So we reverse engineer some of this high-tech braking technology, so KERS technology, for example, and that now exists within our cars that we buy every day in a different format. It's not the same technology, but it's been reverse engineered to give us something that is more energy efficient and eco-efficient when we're driving. We might be able to transfer things from one space to another. So we see that something works really well in the food and drink space, in hospitality. We've seen people who are great at customer service, and we think, how can we transfer that into the health sector? How can the NHS learn from the best restaurants out there? What are the skills that can be shared between those different organizations? How can we innovate based on what we see others doing and transferring that into another context? We might have to innovate because regulation forces us to. So anybody select car leasing, you'll be potentially under this, but anybody who is regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority, you would have experienced quite a lot of change over the past 7-8 years as things have changed around how you can sell finance, how you communicate finance to customers. When we think about what acceptable communication looks like, affordability criteria, and that's changed the rules of the game, but it's forced innovation. That means that actually we're seeing online purchases of vehicles. The finance calculators have come in and of their own right, and people are much more empowered when they're making decisions. We might see an Archimedes moment, so that inspiration when you're in the bath and you suddenly get excited, but it doesn't happen very often. But it could be that we're trying to push science forward. And if we think about the vaccine program, that's been a massive source of innovation. And hopefully it's not just the COVID vaccine, great though that is, it's actually what it will do for cancer treatment and heart care and diabetes and so many other conditions that are massive problems around the world, that the innovation that's happened to get us the COVID vaccine will then push science forward within all of those other spaces. It might be that we have a need. So we've identified a gap, we've identified a need, and as a result, we have to innovate in that space. And for some of you, it could be that your users are innovators. So people who use your product or service do something different with it, something that you really did not expect them to do. And suddenly it has another purpose and you can build on that. And we need to think about innovation as being either closed or open. So historically, much innovation took place in a closed environment. And when we talk about closed innovation, we're talking about the fact that we want everybody in the organization to sign NDAs. Nothing must leave the building. We're not going to share with anybody what we're working on until we're ready to launch it. And there is a purpose for that closed innovation. It allows you to be more competitive. It allows you to be first to market. It allows you to create something that is very much yours. But many organizations are now seeing the value of open innovation. working with universities like Aston through knowledge transfer partnerships, through students coming in to do projects, working with competitors as well. So perhaps there is an industry-wide challenge and you can work together in order to solve that for the benefit of customers everywhere. Perhaps you're working with other elements within your supply chain. So you've gone up the supply chain or down the supply chain to be able to innovate. And that gives you more opportunity. So not only do you come to market, perhaps with the same solution you would have done anyway, if you'd gone through that closed innovation loop, but you also have lots of other ideas that have come out of that process that you could take to alternative markets. You could get a financial reward for that creativity, or a reputational reward if there's something that you come up with that really drives the market. Yeah, shipping containers, good example, Colin, for open innovation there. Over to you, Yasmin.
Okay, if you've got a bit of paper in front of you and a pen, I would like you to try the following. If you could draw 30 circles on your bit of paper, just 30 circles to start with, and then turn those 30 circles into different things. I'm not going to tell you, I'm not going to give you any examples, but each circle should be a different thing. I'll give you one example, a smiley face. For example, one circle can be a smiley face, but then other things, what else could those circles become? What could they represent? I might let Aimee carry on while you do that in the background, and maybe we'll maybe at the end of the presentation we'll ask you to share what some of those circles have become. So you're welcome to draw. We'll give you permission to doodle while we speak.
Yeah, keep drawing away. So how do we create this environment for innovation? And I don't know, Yasmin, do you want to pick up on this, or shall I pick up on this bit?
Works, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. It's come out of the American military and is related to working on secret projects, but it's been adopted by a lot of businesses, namely the tech giants like Google, Apple, Facebook, etc., where they actually have a whole building called Skunk Works, where employees can go and either work on secretive projects or work creatively on brand new things. So in some cases they've gone really extreme with it, where they've got bean bags and ping pong tables and computer games, and the idea is that you go there to just relax. But as we were talking earlier about the ideas in the shower, the ideas on the walk, is that's when the brightest ideas sometimes appear, is when you're literally doing nothing to do with work, and it's being in quite a relaxed state. And it's giving employees the actual space to just chill out and let ideas come their way. And there's no expectation that you have to go in there and create the next iPhone. It's fine if that's not the case, but that is indeed where that will happen, is that space.
Thanks, Yasmin. So there's an interesting kind of discussion that's taking place now as to whether a creative space is what you need to be creative, because the assumption that you have to go somewhere to be creative, that you do it as an add-on to your day job, suggests that you're not going to be creative and innovative as part of your role. And really, we should be thinking about creativity, innovation. They should be embedded within what we do all of the time. So this concept of the Google slide or the ping pong table or the Skunk Works space where you go somewhere different, it had quite a lot of favor and it did generate some amazing things. So Google X Labs, which is looking at kind of travel into space and moonshot stuff in terms of getting Wi-Fi out to really difficult to reach areas of the desert, and projects like that would not have happened without the permission to be creative, the permission to spend time coming up with ideas that weren't necessarily going to be commercial. Yeah, I agree. Creative space, you have to feel a bit relaxed. You can't feel like you're being watched or you're being judged or you're being observed. Saturday night while showering after a relaxing day. Do you know what the worst possible thing is? When you come up with that great idea in the shower and there's nowhere to write it down. So there are these amazing pens that you can get to write on your shower tiles or on the glass on the shower screen. photograph it, and then you've got a record of that idea that came to you in the shower, because otherwise those great ideas just disappear. Walking the dogs as well, dictaphone on your phone, so voice notes, so you don't lose those ideas in the moment. But how do we create that environment for innovation? We've talked about all of this stuff that makes a creative space, but actually that's not what the research says. The research says that we need to make sure that we have the resources. So we need to give people time. It's not just about saying, oh, you can be creative in your free time, but dedicate 20% of your working day. You're allowed to do nothing. That's scary, right? We all want to be productive. Our bosses are telling us that we have to get stuff done. But actually, 20% of your day should be free time to work on whatever it is that excites you, that you're passionate about. And Google does this. Some of the technology companies, there's a software company in Australia that do it, and they do put this time in. Now, I'm not sure whether that means that their 60-hour working weeks become 80-hour working weeks, but there is time dedicated to innovation within that. But we also need support. We need to know that the senior team supports new ideas. There's no point in coming up with innovation, of being creative or inventing something new, if you're just going to get told no. No budget, can't do it, no resource, not happening. We've always done it this way, we're not changing. So culturally, we need to invest in ideas. It needs to be something that comes from the top. And we also need challenge. It can't be easy. So there needs to be, back to this idea of game playing, something that challenges us to want to do better, some element of competition, something that we see that there's a problem that needs to be fixed. We also need the personal motivation, and that means we have to be prepared to have conflict. Yasmin was saying earlier, we do a huge amount of work with our MBA cohorts in teams, and you'll probably all have had the experience where you've been, whether it's in the workplace or in an academic environment, you've been put into a team to work on a project. And you hate it, don't you? Because somebody is going to coast, somebody's going to do no work, somebody's going to do all of the work and resent it. If you've got cultural differences, technology differences, everybody's in different time zones, that overcomplicates it even more. And teamwork, you just hate it, right? It would be much easier if you could get on and do it on your own. But one of the things that we talk to our teams about is this idea of conflict. If you are going to have a good, high-performing, high-functioning team, and there is theory behind this, you need to be able to embrace conflict. You need to be able to embrace those difficult discussions, because the conflict means you're passionate. The conflict means that you all care about getting to that end result. And as long as you've got the tools to be constructive and polite with that conflict, respectful of each other, you can challenge and you can come out with something better at the end. But you also need to be able to have fun. Quite a few of you mentioned fun at the start of this session when we were talking about game playing. It can't all be serious. You can't just come into a session and instantly get down to work, come up with something amazing and creative and leave again, having not found anything out about each other. So there has to be some sort of relationship and dynamic between people who are working together to get that best creativity and innovation to come through. And you need to know that you can take risks. Business is scary. We have to take risks. We have to get on with stuff. And if we're in a small environment, so particularly micro SME, but also just generally any business, risk taking is often seen as scary. But we will not be able to innovate unless we know and we accept that sometimes we're going to get it wrong. And do you know what? That's part of the learning journey. Richard Branson definitely didn't get it right every time, but look where he is now. We also did say to you, and I'm conscious of time here, but we did say we'd introduce a little bit about design thinking to you as well. So the idea behind design thinking is it's a process. And I bet you when you signed up for something around creativity and game playing, you didn't think you'd be hearing process, but game playing is a process, design thinking is a process. And it's a process through which you can create ideas, through which you can get from nothing, so you've got a problem, to a solution. And to do that, you have to understand the problem. So this is your research phase. You're finding out everything there is to know. You're observing what's going on. You're pulling that together. That then allows you to come up with ideas, to be creative, to put in place some of that game storming activity. You then choose something, you test the prototype, and you implement it. And there is a way of thinking that we do this. And back to the game storming, most games follow this process as well. So we start off with an opening question. What is it we're here to solve today? What do we want to know? What do we want our customer to feel at the end of the process? And then we're divergent. So we open out, we think emotively, we think of all of the different possible options. This is where you'll have heard there's no such thing as a bad idea. Well, there isn't. This is about getting everything onto the whiteboard, onto the virtual mural board or Jamboard or whatever tools you're using. Just get everything out there. And you can use game storming tools like, what's the worst possible thing we could do? So come up with all the bad ideas, because they're the things that are going to prompt you to then say, okay, well, why is that a bad idea? And how can I develop from that? Or what would happen if? So if money were no limit, what would we do? And then come up with as many of those ideas as you can. You then start to explore. This is your emergent stage. So you're exploring those different ideas. You might start to group some of them together. So they might have similar themes. They might be addressing things in a particular way. And then you close it off. So closing, converging, coming together. So this is where you choose the ideas that you want to be able to focus on, that you want to be able to take forward. And there's a good question in the chat around how do we incorporate this into our day? It's tricky. And this is where we're saying culturally, it has to come from the top to a certain extent, but everybody has got 10 minutes in their day to doodle, 10 minutes to come up with something. It does take that organizational change and shift around if you really want to invest in it. But everybody can spend 10, 15 minutes instead of scrolling through social media, come up with one good idea for a client a week. So every week, set the challenge to yourself, gamify the process. You've got to come up with one idea that's going to make their experience better every week. And sometimes you will have the power to influence the change and sometimes you won't. But you'll know that you're constantly being creative, innovating, working on behalf of that customer. And you will get the slides afterwards, so you can have a look at the double diamond, but this is the actual process that you can follow for design thinking. So you have your challenge, you go through your discovery phase, you define what it is you're trying to do, focus on being people-centered. So it's all about human-centered, people-centered design. And then develop it, deliver it, and that gets your outcome. So there is a process to follow. And definitely you could spend that social media scrolling time adding value to a client as well. And I used to use that excuse when I worked in PR. All the time I spent scrolling through social media, I was definitely looking for ideas for my clients, not just wasting time scrolling. So this is another challenge, and I'm keen to see what you've done for your circles. So we won't necessarily do this one, but the idea behind squiggle birds is that you ask everybody in the room to draw a series of squiggles. So on your piece of paper, you just squiggle. And then you say to everybody, okay, pick one of those squiggles and stick a triangle for a tail on it. And then on that same squiggle, stick a triangle for a beak. And then find somewhere to put an eye. Add some little bird feet. And guess what? You've got a bird. So those of you who've said you are not creative and you can't draw anything, you've drawn yourself a squiggle bird. So again, that's a good way if you've got people who are resistant within a group, who don't necessarily want to engage in the creative process. It's a really simple way to just break the ice a bit with them and get started. There are tools like Scamper. So I know we're going whistle stop here, but Scamper is substitute, combine, amplify, modify, I've lost it now, extend and replace or reverse. So there are different, and you'll find different definitions for Scamper. But the idea behind it is that you take up as much as you want in terms of existing content, existing ideas, and then say, okay, well, if we were to substitute A for B, then what product would we get instead? If we were to combine these two things, what would we get instead? So again, we're talking process here for creativity. How do we get process in place so that we can be more creative? And I'm going to apologise because I thought we were finishing at 1:30, not 1:15. So apologies for keeping you longer over your lunch, but hopefully you are getting some value from it. So we'll just finish off with the idea screening side of things. So once you've got all of these ideas, you've got to find a way of deciding which ideas you're going to do what with. So are they adding value to your organisation? Are they going to bring in money? Are they profitable? What are the costs associated? What are the resources? Do they align with what you're already doing? And rather than getting people to give you negative feedback, you might want them to say, I like this about the idea, I wish it could do that, and what if it did this instead? So rather than what do you like and what do you don't like, because people hate giving negative feedback, what do you want it, what do you like, what do you wish it could do, and what if it did that instead? And that is us rounded up. So I know we've done a whistle stop tour. There's been a lot of information there, and we will share the slides with the chamber team so they can pass them on to you. I want to see what you've drawn in your circles. So those of you who are left, what have you put in your circles?
Can we put gallery view on maybe, and you can all hold up if you've got them, if you've done some. Let's see. Oh yeah. Oh, we've got sun, stars.
Yeah.
Ice cream. I like that. Eyes. Oh,
Yeah.
a sweet. A Pokemon. Is that a Pokeball? What is that? A wheel. Clock. What else have we got? A stop sign. There,
Yeah.
something that looks like a pumpkin. Sunflower. Planet. Michelle, I can't quite see yours. Do you want to bring it a bit closer? That's better. Wow, wow, yours are great. We've got birds. Is that coronavirus? One of them looks like the coronavirus with a little.
That's my massage ball.
Ah,
Fantastic.
Which I will look at in a whole new light now. Thank you.
Amazing.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I'm surprised I haven't seen very much pizza. There's normally pizza that appears within the circles, but hopefully you've got some value from that. You are more than welcome to follow up with myself or Yasmin if you've got any questions. We definitely can't do definitely can't do justice to everything that is gameplay and creativity and innovation in under an hour, but do play. That's the one thing to take away from this, is don't be afraid to play.